Chest up, shoulders back. This is Revival Fitness. And whether you admit it or not, as guys, we are always thinking in the back of our minds, or at the front of our minds, about the bench press. And this is not something that is exclusive to powerlifting, because the vast majority of guys are never going to compete in powerlifting. A lot of guys are never going to even squat or deadlift.
Pass!
But they're still going to focus on the bench, ask what other guys bench, size their bench up versus their friends. It's just what guys do. And something about this exercise that I've come to realize lately, it is far more complicated in terms of form than I used to realize, and I think much more than a lot of people, even in the overall lifting space, will really tell you. So while the bench looks very simple at a glance, if you want to really optimize your progress on this exercise, there are a lot of cues you need to be thinking about on every single rep. What do the vast majority of guys do? They flop down on the bench, they scoot back, they unrack the bar. That's all they got. So once you get down on the bench, the first thing I like to do is find my grip on the bar. So the grip width here can obviously change based on what exact type you're doing. Maybe you're doing close grip bench press, more medium, maybe wide. You guys can see, I do not have very thick wrists myself. I'm a member of the deer bone gang. A lot of you guys are too. So you may have had this problem yourself. Sometimes even just unracking a relatively heavy bench press bar, you can have that little wiggle in your wrist, or the bar might kind of roll back and forth in your hands. This has completely prevented that from happening to me, this cue that I learned. So I got this from J.M. Blakely. He's an old powerlifter. He used to bench, I don't know, something ridiculous, like 700 pounds or something. You're going to actually turn your wrists out more so you can fully engage the forearms when you press. So a cue you might hear a lot of people say on the bench is pull the bar apart. I used to not really understand what that meant, or I think I tried to, but I would more so do this. Like I would turn my wrists in more, trying to bend the bar down. What you want to think about though is actually bending the bar upward, and that is going to turn on your forearms. But basically what you're going to do, if you watch whenever I turn my wrists out, right here, if I just remove the broom, right? If you're going to flex your forearm, you do this, right? Imagine you're doing the same thing with the bar. So once you get a hold of it, just slightly twist your hands out and your wrists out, and you can feel this yourself if you do this with even something like a broom or a PVC pipe, but you're really going to turn on the forearms. That's going to give you a much more stable base to hold heavy weight in your hands. So given that this is something you might have just heard for the first time, you're going to forget to do it. I still forget to do this sometimes, but whenever I do forget, I immediately notice. Once that is done, then I'm going to initiate the rest of the setup sequence. And the next part here is going to be get a modest arch. Now, once again, guys, you don't need to turn into the McDonald's logo like you see a lot of powerlifters do, especially the girls in powerlifting who are very flexible. I mean, this stuff turns into a giant pissing contest with like a 2-inch range of motion. But the fact of the matter is, a modest arch is going to better protect your shoulders. It's going to more so engage your upper back as well as your lats, and it's going to expand your chest. Now, something to note here, you may feel low back tightness or soreness whenever you set up your arch. Most men especially just don't have the flexibility, no matter how much you work on it, to get an extreme arch going. But if you do a modest arch and your low back kind of gets sore, don't push it, right? Arch as much as you can comfortably. But if you are really sore in the low back, you may need to adjust your form or the weight for that day. Although I think in the grand scheme of things, that's probably not going to be terribly likely. If you want to maybe stretch out a little bit, like maybe hang from a pull-up bar, decompress your spine, that might be able to help too. And then that little bit of arch is going to have some clearance. So you're going to feel your lats on the bench as well to some extent, and this is going to vary too based on how big you are overall. But the two biggest points of contact on the bench are going to be the glutes and then the upper back. So once I dig myself in, then I'm going to put my feet back down on the ground. I am going to push them back as far as I can comfortably. And what you want to go for here is getting the front of the foot behind the knees, or at least as close to that as you can. Sometimes guys will just bench with their feet out in front of their knees. That's going to totally remove your ability to at least effectively use leg drive. And I know some people say like leg drive is a myth, it doesn't exist. Guys, I don't think that you're going to somehow leg drive your way into a much bigger bench press, but in terms of overall stability and a little bit of boost to it, I think it's pretty obviously going to help you. Because keep in mind, like pretty much every other compound exercise too, the bench press, while it's obviously upper body pushing muscle focused, it's still a full body movement. Meaning, your lower body is still on the bench. I mean, your butt is on the bench. A lot of your lower extremities are hanging off of the bench. So if you're very loose in the lower body, right, your legs are just completely wherever they want to be. God forbid you're doing happy feet. You know, whenever guys are tap dancing while they do their bench press reps, just their feet are totally loose, just going back and forth on the ground. There's no tightness there. Do not do that. You want to be doing this as if you're doing a squat or a deadlift. You want your feet to be positioned in the same spot every single time. Dig them into the ground. Now, some people might bench press with their toes up. Other people might have their foot entirely flat on the ground. That's a more individual preference. Whatever you want to do though, however you exactly choose it, press your feet into the ground with force, try to really screw them in. You want to be completely statuesque in the lower body when doing this exercise, all the way down to the toes. And if I didn't make this clear already, you're doing all of this before you unrack the bar. You see some guys, they unrack the bar, then they like try to shimmy and shake and get their feet in position. No! And even when it comes to unracking the bar, a lot of guys make this harder than it needs to be. I've done this myself too in the past, very guilty. Now, depending on the bench you're using, especially if it's not adjustable, you may not have a choice here. But what a lot of guys do is, whenever they unrack the bench press bar, they will basically push it up and then take it out, and they sort of add an extra step when they don't need to. It goes up and then they pull it out, or maybe, you know what I mean, like they go up like a J, then back down or something. Now, once again, if you've got like some hooks and you have to kind of clear those a little bit, I understand, but you want to make that direct line as straight as you can so you don't bleed any energy before your first rep. Don't think about going up and down with the bar, because that's how a lot of guys will lose their tightness, like all the stuff we just talked about. If you raise up the bar too high, right, and your upper back sort of gets off of the pad and you lose your shoulder positioning, all this other stuff, you're going to have to try to get tight again, which, like I just said, is not going to be good with weight in your hands, or you have to re-rack the bar, do this all over again. Not a good idea. You want to, instead of thinking about up and down when unracking and re-racking the bar, think about back and forth. A big mistake guys make is starting out far away from the hooks. Now, I understand if you have an obnoxiously large bench with like really big hooks, you can tend to sort of hit the bar into them, and that can be annoying. But what so many guys do is they will scoot so far away from the hooks, they'll have to spend a lot of energy just simply unracking the bar because they have to reach back so far. They're doing like a legitimate, almost half pull-over range of motion, but with a heavy bench press bar. So you want to be as close as you possibly can be to the hooks while being able to dodge hitting the hooks on the way up. Now, something to note with the upper back too, because I said this for years myself. The conventional wisdom when it comes to the upper back on the bench is to retract your scapula. And that basically means you're going to not only compress your shoulders down, you're going to squeeze your shoulder blades together. Now, that's something that would make more sense on a squat, for example, because there's a heavy bar on your back. You want to have your back as cinched up as possible to do so. Something I've come to realize, though, and I have my own experience, guys, with scapular winging. If you guys have ever taken a picture or seen a video of your back, and it looks like this, as you can see on the screen here, one side is like really sticking out. What's happening there is movement dysfunction. If you're always going to really squeeze your shoulder blades together when bench pressing, and because a lot of guys do a fair amount of bench pressing for their volume, that can potentially lead to movement issues in those areas, because compressing your shoulder blades together when you're doing upper body exercises like this, it's going to limit the amount of stabilizer muscles and other things next to the prime movers that can assist. So that includes like the serratus, that includes the lats, all those little areas of the shoulder too, right? So keep that in mind, guys. I used to say this too, so if you see an old video of mine saying to retract your scapula, you can disregard that now. And I benched for a long time while retracting my scapula. I don't think it's necessarily dangerous, but I've since stopped doing that. Now I only do scapular depression. So instead of squeezing the back together and kind of putting that onto the pad, I will just kind of lower my shoulder blades. You can sort of think about it like engaging your lats and that's going to kind of pull your shoulders and your scapula down a little bit, that's all I do now. But if you're somebody especially that has a lot of odd movements on the bench press, like the bar really tilts down to one side on a lot of your reps, if you really start to kind of shimmy and shift into one side of your body, the scapular retraction, I would say, is probably not helping. See how that goes for you, but I can say for me, it's definitely helped in more ways than one. So all dug into the bench, we finally got the bar unracked. Once you unrack the bar, you want it to be roughly over your clavicle or collarbone, upper chest, somewhere around that area, but that's where it's going to be resting. Now in terms of the bar path, as I just talked about actually, the fastest way to get from A to B is always going to be a straight line. That's what a lot of people follow when it comes to the bench press bar path in terms of the reps themselves. I used to think about that too, but the more I've done this lift, the more I've coached it, the more I've seen other people do it. I think the best bar path on this exercise, whereas a lot of barbell exercises, it's simply going to be straight up and down, you want to have a very slight angle when doing this. Now you can go straight up and down with the bench press bar if that works for you. I think that's going to work more so for people with very short arms, and especially guys that use a bunch of like wraps and sleeves and slingshots, all that other stuff. I think that's more applicable for them. But for the vast majority of us, I don't think that's what you want to do. If you lower the bar straight down, you're going to do a guillotine press basically. If you can do it without shoulder pain, I guess that's fine, but we're talking about the normal bench press here. So doing this with a normal bench press, benching it up high like this, you're going to pay for that. So whenever you lower the bench press bar, you want to think about always having the bar touch right below the nipples. So you can think of like a nipple line if you had to draw a horizontal line across right underneath your chest, just right underneath it, no lower than that, like the point exactly where the fibers stop. That's where you're going to lower the bench press bar. Then you're going to press it back to above the upper chest or the collarbone, and it's going to go in an angle, as you can see here. But the bar should be hitting the same spot every single time. Right at the bottom of the chest, the nipple line, not any higher, not any lower. The middle of the chest, or anything above that especially, is going to be too high, and if you're hitting like the stomach, that's going to be too low. And what happens a lot of the time, I've seen this over and over when reviewing like client footage, they will, at the bottom of the bench press, their wrist is going to be in front of their elbow. So they're going to sort of be benching almost like this, or maybe they go down and it kind of turns into a J at the bottom, then they press back up. This right here is not going to be terrible for most guys, but this is going to absolutely bleed you strength if your wrist is in front of your elbow. And you'll still be able to finish reps like this in the vast majority of cases, but think about to a point if you get to a very hard rep and you need to really power out of the bottom, or if the bar starts to kind of shift on you, if your wrist is in front of your elbow, like say you're at this angle and you start to fail, you're not going to win that battle. So unless you've got safety arms or a spotter, that could get pretty ugly. If you guys do want to see a video on how to do the roll of shame, how to fail a bench press by yourself with no safety arms, it's possible. It's not exactly fun, but it's possible. You can watch the video in the top corner for that. The reason I think so many guys struggle with this, as I used to as well, I still do actually. The thing is, if you are somebody with average length arms or beyond, which again, you guys see a lot of these tutorials in the fitness industry, and you can see an example here of me and Jeff Nippard comparatively on the bench press from the same angle. My range of motion is legitimately twice as long as his, because I think he's like 5'4", I'm 5'10". A lot of these guys, man, and people get upset about this because I talk about height, a lot of these fitness influencers, man, are very, very short guys, okay? So you see their form, and they can squat really deep with a perfectly neutral back, they can bench with this perfect stuff. It's like, that might work for them in their small leverages, but for a lot of normal height or beyond people, especially for you tall guys, it's not going to look nearly as pretty. But a lot of guys have commented this on videos of me benching, whether it's barbell, dumbbell, whatever, incline even, and they will say, it looks like you're flaring your elbows, bro. And I'm not flaring my elbows, they're actually tucked in slightly, even if you can't really tell. There's no shoulder pain happening in this clip, for example. That said though, if you have long arms, especially long forearms, like I do, if you have any semblance of a close or even moderate grip on the bar, just given the leverages that you were born with, your elbows are going to have to sort of turn out a little bit at the bottom if you want to go through the full range. So not only will guys think that you're flaring your elbows if you're not, even if you are making no mistakes in that regard, you may still have the problem of the wrist going in front of the elbow if you're going to go all the way down, simply because you have nothing else to do. Like, your body and your bones and everything, they have to get down to that point, and that's the only way they can. I'm currently doing my ring finger on the ring of the barbell on like a typical power bar. So if you're somebody that fits these criteria that I'm talking about with average length or longer arms, you are probably going to have to take a relatively wide grip on the bench press to avoid this from happening. So to keep your wrist totally stacked over your elbow, which is the most mechanically advantageous position to bench press from, you're not going to be able to do this with a close grip style. So no matter what type of grip you're doing, whenever you press, you want to think about tucking your elbows in during the entire phase of both reps, not just one way or the other. As soon as you unrack it, twist the elbows in, and then keep that position as you do the negative and the positive of the reps. So once you finally have that down, do your reps, whether it's 1 rep or 20, whatever you're going to do. Once you finish, again, your feet should be planted down in the ground this entire time. Everything should be totally statuesque in your body, except your arms moving up and down to press the weight, your chest contracting. I mean, even your lats are going to be contracting a bit in this exercise too, just by default. But everything else is going to be totally stationary. Once you finish, big thing here, guys, I see this all the time too, do not re-rack the bar until you get it totally steady. What a lot of guys do is on the final rep, especially if they're going to fail it otherwise and they start to cheat, they start to hip thrust, they will try to just hoist and throw the bar back into the hooks without firmly like locking their arms out. Do not put a bar back into the hooks if you have not locked your arms out. The only exception here is going to be if you have access to one of those benches with multiple hooks. But if you have a standard setup with only the top hooks, don't try this stuff where it's like, oh, it's midway up, I'm going to just hip thrust and then throw it. If you miss that, it's going to fall right on your neck. So as a rule, guys, never re-rack a bench press bar into the top rungs until you have totally locked it out. Even if you have to cheat and hip thrust it and stuff and kind of shimmy to get it to the lockout position, get it locked out, let your arms come to a full stop, get the bar completely stable, then easily put it back in the hooks. And then you can smoothly re-rack it and be like, dang, I'm still stuck on 185. And one last note here, there's no excuses for doing partial reps, guys. Okay, I know I used to do this too all the time, because I'd say, oh, well, partial reps keep constant tension on my chest, even though the farther down you go, the more you're stretching your chest anyway, even with the pause. If you're gonna do partials on the bench press, guys, you need to do them planned, okay? You need to do something like a pin press, maybe get a board. A lot of powerlifting gyms have like those wooden boards. A lot of you guys probably don't have access to those. What you can get though, are what you can see on the screen here. They're called bench blocks. They have different kind of cut-in grooves. So they might be an inch or a half inch. You can put those onto the bar, and that's going to provide a little sort of buffer for the partial range of motion that you want to use, and you don't need somebody there to hold a board or something else onto you. But if you're going to do partials, guys, use them strategically. Don't do what a lot of guys do, and they touch to their chest for the first 3, then it gets harder, and they lower 90% down, then 80%, then 70%, and by their final rep, they do a legit just half rep. It's almost just like a tricep extension or a skull crusher, not even a bench. Then they count them all as the same number of reps, like they're all valid. No. And understand too, if you're not going to listen to my advice and you're going to be like, I'm still doing partials, bro, it's a great way to get hurt, man. I mean, that's how it happens for a lot of guys. You do partials over and over and over, nothing ever happens, you think it's fine. One of these days, man, one of these days, Alice, you're going to go for a weight that is too heavy, whether you push a rep that you just can't do or whether you go for a PR that you're not ready to do yet, because you're going to do it, you're a guy, you're going to go for it at some point. You're going to go down to your normal stopping point without anything to stop the weight, right? No safety arms, no block or anything. You're going to get to that point and you're going to say, oh, I can't get it up. The only place for that bar to go is down. And guess what? You have not been training that bottom portion of the lift. So not only are you weak in that lowest portion, you have not been training the mobility with heavy weight either. So you get there, that's why a lot of guys end up tearing pecs on the bench press, man. They get to that lowest point they commonly skip, and then their body has no choice but to snap itself up because it's overcompensating so hard, because it has not been working in that range for an extended period of time. So just avoid all this, guys. Use what you can control, do paused reps, so your ego can really take a backseat to this type of thing. Only count the paused reps, lower all the way down, keep this all buttoned up. You're gonna get a bigger chest, a stronger bench. Even if in the moment you have to reduce the weight and it kinda sucks, it's gonna pay off much more in the long run. But this has been it for me, guys. I hope this video was helpful. Drop a like if it was and share it with a friend. Be sure to get your program down below if you have not already. Start making some real gains. With less time in the gym, you can also get in direct contact with me about your own questions regarding training and eating, and join our Discord server. Hundreds of other members in there now. So thank you for watching, and I will catch you next time.